The dystopian nightmare that leads to Donald Trump being an authoritarian. It's so important that it needed to be aired during an award show on BET. What is Project 2025? It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Just hit subscribe, Apple, Spotify. Or if you're watching this right now on YouTube, just go to the text description underneath this live stream. You'll see a button right there for the Will Cain Show page. On that page, you're going to find past episodes. You're going to find interviews like that with Kevin Costner or Donald Trump. And if you hit subscribe, you'll be able to hang out, catch up with us at any time you like here on the Will Cain Show. Schedule F, Project 2025. Here is John Oliver.
Project 2025 is born from an impulse as old as America. It's an impulse that says one class of Americans is entitled to lead, and the rest of us are lucky to be allowed to serve, that thinks there should be a limited government when it comes to rules they have to live by, but also a unitary executive to keep the rest of us in line. These are old ideas that have been shouted from podiums by the likes of George Wallace and Pat Buchanan, but have now been placed into a new handbook for an only too willing president to use on day one. And in a perfect world, I would love if we had an opposing party better able to articulate a strong defence of our country's ideals and that also consistently lived up to them.
That was the end of a 20-minute monologue on John Oliver's HBO show. If you are watching right now and you are a self-styled conservative, you can consider yourself on the right, but you're not dug deep into policy and politics, it's very probable you've never heard of Project 2025. If you watch John Oliver or MSNBC or BET, it is very probable that you believe Project 2025 is the playbook to Nazism. So let's find out exactly what it is. Let's bring in the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts. The Heritage Foundation, one of the groups behind authoring Project 2025, and he's here now on the Will Cain Show. What's up, Kevin? Good to see you.
Will, it's great to see you. Thanks for everything you do, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. If I ask you this open-ended question, which I think is where we have to start, you could begin by giving me a 20-minute monologue like John Oliver. But I think I have to start here, and hopefully we can walk through this conversationally together. What is Project 2025?
It is the most organized set of policy ideas that the conservative movement has ever put together in history. And Heritage is one of just one of 110 organizations that are part of it. It is basically the entire menu of what grassroots conservatives who have been subjugated by the left's concentration of power in Washington and state capitals around the country have designed to do. It's candidate agnostic. It's something that Heritage has done every 4 years. But what we wanted to do for this year, Will, and I promise I'm not going to give you a 20-minute monologue, is to make sure that well before the primaries, both the Republican and Democrat primary, that we brought the center-right together in this country around the idea of correcting actually the thing that John Oliver is talking about. In other words, the left is really good at projection. They're the ones who are guilty of subjugating our freedom, of essentially ending individual American sovereignty. And what we're trying to do, in a very calm, peaceful way, is bring some order back to D.C. All of that to say that we have offered a briefing of Project 2025 to every candidate across the political spectrum, including President Biden, because we're a nonpartisan group, even though we are, of course, unabashedly conservative. And you might say that all of this attention just means we're right over the target. Americans are ready to have their country back, and we look forward to that happening.
I'm glad you brought up the concept of projection. I think it is rampant in our political discourse. And when I did watch the entirety of the 20-minute monologue by John Oliver, it occurred to me exactly that. So much projection that if you're attempting to cut back on permanent Washington, you're attempting to give people a greater democratic voice. He sees it in the opposite. And I want to get into the substance, and I want to talk about some of what Project 2025 is about. But you point out, and I think very accurately, the left has really hyperventilated. They've turned this, either they legitimately have hyperventilated or turned it into a scare tactic to motivate their base into voting. And Kevin, it seems to have worked to some degree because over the weekend, Donald Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025. I think I've characterized that perfectly. He said, basically, I don't know who's behind it, whether or not that's true. I doubt that that's true, by the way. And he said, it is not part of my governing agenda. I don't know or have much to do with Project 2025. What do you take away from Donald Trump distancing himself from your project?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. I think that if you consider that the Biden campaign has spent $15 million on attack ads, obviously primarily on President Trump, our standard bearer this year, but some millions of those have gone against Project 2025 in particular, then if you're running for president and you're trying to win not just any campaign, but what we think at Heritage is the most significant campaign in modern American history, then it makes sense that politically you want to pivot from that. There are no hard feelings from us at Project 2025 or Heritage about that. We love President Trump, and we love President Trump in addition to him personally, but also because his policy record when he was president of the United States is so much better than President Biden's has been. All of that to say that it's also important to remember, as we say all the time, President Trump's the boss. If he wins, he's going to make the decisions. Project 2025 is merely a menu from which he might be able to choose. It has a database of personnel who are willing to go into office and work for him if he so chooses. But one final point that's important is that this is a reflection of grassroots conservatism. It is, regardless of what anyone thinks on the left or the right or the center, the most unified project in the history of the conservative movement, and it's not going anywhere.
And I want to get into, and I'm going to get into, with the time we have together, the nuts and bolts on what Project 2025 believes policy-wise and how it proposes itself to be a bit of a handbook for an incoming president. But back to President Trump for just a minute, Kevin. Is it your understanding that he has distanced himself from it because the left, because you brought up how much they've spent in demonizing Project 2025. Is it your understanding he's distanced himself from your project because they've successfully demonized Project 2025? Or is it because he has substantive policy disagreements with some of what you've recommended?
I think if you look at the spending against Project 2025 by the Biden campaign and whatever the affiliated super PACs have spent, it's the former. It's that if you're trying to win a campaign and Project 2025 has become the one thing that the left can talk about because they can't defend Biden's record or frankly his mental capabilities, I don't say that to be ugly, towards him as a person, then you got to turn to something else. They can't turn to President Trump's record as president because it was terrific. So they found this one boogeyman, Project 2025. And if you're the political candidate who is sort of victimized by this amount of spending on this, it makes perfect political sense to do that. There are, of course, across the conservative movement, so including President Trump, policy differences. I mean, the point of Project 2025 is not to say that 100% of this must be implemented by the next president. We've never been that presumptuous. Right. In fact, that this whole point of this is to be of service to any administration. It's more likely to be of service to a conservative one. But the point is, I think President Trump obviously is going to make great decisions, as he did toward the latter half of his administration in his first term. We think that Project 2025 continues to be a huge help because it is a representation of the entire conservative movement.
And would this be a good example, Kevin? I believe J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have also sort of distanced President Trump as advocates for Trump or surrogates for Trump, distanced themselves at least in part from Project 2025. Would a good example of that be perhaps there's been a mischaracterization that Project 2025 would push for a national abortion ban? I don't think that's part of your 900-page presentation, but you are opposed to the abortion pill, the drug. And I believe J.D. Vance said very recently, like in the last 24 hours, he's not, for example. So, and I'm not sure where President Trump is on that. I think he's the same as J.D. Vance when it comes to the abortion pill. So is that an example in your understanding of a policy difference that you guys would have at Project 2025 that is in disagreement with Vance, Rubio, Trump?
Yeah, great question. That's an excellent example of an issue where there might be some daylight between the aspirations long-term about social and cultural improvement, where we have an entirely pro-life country. That's something that's far upstream of society. But even at Project 2025 and at Heritage, we understand that the political dynamics this election cycle are such that you want to run on other issues where the left, and particularly President Biden, have been so awful. President Trump and Senator Rubio, Senator Vance, I should say, all three of them personal friends, are men who are saying we can go win this election on closing the border, on ending the nonsense of the Green New Deal, of repairing the American economy, of making sure that when you go to the grocery store and to the gas station, you're not paying 30% inflation over 3.5 years. Those are the issues rightly in a political sense that we need to be talking about in order for conservatives to prevail in this election. But I should also say that on these matters of differences of opinion, and there are very few, that the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 will always be aspirational about sovereignty for everyone, including sovereignty of the unborn.
All right, let's go through some of the characterizations. I don't even want to call it criticism because I haven't found much substantively. It's a war of characterization right now on what is Project 2025. So let's go through some of the characterizations and then your explanation of what is Project 2025. Here is Jamel Hill. She tweeted the following. This is regarding how the media should be covering Trump versus Biden. And Hill says that the media should have been reporting on Project 2025 from the start. They haven't been, and certainly not with the same breathless intensity of VP Harris's likability or Biden's age. Mark Ruffalo, the Incredible Hulk, tweeted the following. He said, Project 2025 is not a game. It's white Christian nationalism. It is Sharia law of the Christian crazy people who aren't Christian at all, but want to control every aspect of your life through their narrow and exclusive interpretation of Christ's egalitarian, inclusive, and kindly teachings. Do not be fooled by Project 2025's extremist and perverse ideology. Trump is bringing to all of our lives abortion, LGBTQA, a lot of letters, rights, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of education, and equality between the races and genders, all of that gone. Forced birth and forced religion, Trump's American Taliban. Mark Ruffalo, Kevin, on your Project 2025.
100% wrong. He needs to take a class in reading comprehension and logic. In fact, from this old logic and history teacher, Will, as you know, I'd give him an F- for using the fallacy of the straw man. So, and that's basically been the entirety of the leftist characterization. Other very inferior media outlets to your own constantly engaged in mischaracterization. But let me say on this point, it's really important that we have an intellectually honest conversation about policy, about the vision for America. Heritage and I are willing to do that anytime, as you know, if someone wants to be intellectually honest and deal with the facts. But literally everything that he said that you just read about Project 2025 is wrong. And so we are real excited about the opportunity that the left has created to elevate this so-called controversy about a project that actually reflects the center right of this country. All of that to say that what we'll be doing over the next few weeks is showing the myths about Project 2025. We're going to be punching back at the radical left, the common political opponent we have, along with our friend President Trump. And I think when hopefully he is taking office January 20th, 2025, we're going to leave the observations to the talking heads that we're going to see he's going to make great decisions. Most of them are very much in a line with Project 2025. And where there are differences of opinion, we've always known that. This is completely in service to what he wants to do in spite of the scare tactics of the radical left.
All right. Well, I appreciate that desire to elevate the conversation around policy. So how about this? If you'll accept the invitation, Kevin, I invite Mark Ruffalo to come on the Will Cain Show here and have a very honest, open conversation about what he believes Project 2025 to be, you to explain what you intended Project 2025 to be, and see if we can arrive at some level of understanding. I hope that he would accept that invitation, but he might rather deal in hyperbole and hyperventilation and propaganda about what it is. Or maybe he wins the debate and he proves that you are not telling the truth about Project 2025, Kevin. So he's welcome to come have that conversation here on the Will Cain Show. All right, let's talk first. There's a couple of specifics I want to hit. So let's talk about Schedule F. That's what John Oliver spent 20 minutes on. Now, Schedule F, and you can tell me if I'm characterizing this right, because I don't consider myself an expert, Kevin, but this is basically the HR department, the HR wing, the hiring practices of the federal government. In that monologue, Kevin, your colleague Russ Vaught has been on the Will Cain Show here, and we've talked about this. I've talked about this with many other people. It's fascinating. He admits There's something like, what is it, Kevin? Over 2 million federal employees. Only of those 2 million, is it 4,000 that are political appointees? And the remaining 1.96 million federal employees are what you and I have, and we'll admittedly say somewhat derisively, described as permanent Washington. These are people there on a constant basis, regardless of administration. And is it correct that Schedule F, your proposal is to move many of those jobs that are permanent into politically appointed, so that I would assume, in your estimation, they better reflect the Democratic ideal of whoever was elected? In their characterization, by the way, they'd say so that you're hiring yes men and not experts in their field.
That is 100% correct. So thank you, Will Cain, for giving an A+ answer on that. Let me be specific. There are 2.2 million federal employees. Let's posit that they're all great people. I'm willing to do that because I love fellow Americans. But we then also have to posit that there are too many of them in those jobs. If you go ask that question of average Americans, they will say the same thing, not because they wish any harm against anyone who works for the federal government, but they believe that this concentration of power, which is intensified under the Obama and Biden presidencies, has to come to an end. And so Schedule F is but one vehicle that can happen. It might be that some of these employees are able to retain their jobs and go to offices outside D.C. That would be great. It might be they go to the private sector. It may be that some of these jobs come to an end, all for the more important purpose of saying that until we devolve power from Washington, D.C. back to the American people, we are going to continue to live in a regulatory state that runs roughshod over our rights. In fact, I could take practically every screed that has been issued about Project 2025 and turn it on its head using the same exact language and say, in fact, what the left is arguing is what they're guilty of. And let me just make one prediction for you. We're going to be telling that story between now and Election Day.
So when you bring that up, Kevin, I assume this takes us back to where we began our conversation. That's a bit about projection. So look, if you have 2 million employees who, let's just characterize them as non-political appointees. That means they stay in their jobs regardless of whoever is the president. Then by their very nature, they are less susceptible to the democratic process. They're less accountable, less answerable to the democratic process, right? They survive. They work there. They run the agencies, the FDA, NASA, whatever it may be. They run it no matter who is the president. And the president is a reflection of democracy. He is elected with his vision. So it's your proposal, just so I understand, to make fewer of those insulated from political pressure. So you would rather see more of those jobs under the president's direction. And if I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, Kevin, I would say, and therefore more responsive to democracy.
That is exactly right. So I can tell that you are a fellow Longhorn, went to University of Texas Law School, right? Because you came
By the way,
back
the
to
real
your
UT,
question.
right, Kevin? Can we just jump in and just to the current bait, the real UT?
Yeah, that's exactly right. But to your very important question, sorry for the little bit of interjection there, but it's nice to have fun in DC and laugh once in a while. That's the point. Look, I'm an early American historian, and in the first 20 years or so of our wonderful republic, 100% of federal employees, other than the very small standing Army and Navy, were political appointees. And so for those of us at Heritage, where we are originalists, we believe that while society has changed, and there can be a certain number of federal employees who are under the civil service protection, the reason the founders said they wanted a huge percentage of them to be political appointees is because the president of the United States is the representation of the people in the executive branch. And so he or she must have power to hire and fire at will. The left, of course, when they hear this, they see this as a great threat to its power. Because it is. They really have to have this system of not just bureaucracy, but this concentrated power in D.C. I actually think that is the precise reason that the radical left has gone so apoplectic over this wonderful plan.
And what you and I both know, and this is where I'm being less of your inquisitor and more of just, what you and I agree on is like, there's ideological capture within those 2 million. So if they're permanent, it's a permanent direction for the United States of America. That is, that could be antithetical to the will of the American people. It was just a fact. We know this, whether or not it's the DOJ, the FBI, or the National Health Services, whatever it may be. There's ideological capture in these jobs. Now, you and I could have another hour-long conversation about why. I mean, why is the oil industry largely conservative? Why is the media overwhelmingly liberal? Well, government employees are overwhelmingly liberal, and so it's ideological capture that is antithetical to the will of the public. But here's their argument, and I want to give them their best foot forward. Their argument would be, okay, but many of these people, NASA, whatever, they're experts in their field, Kevin. They know what they're doing. And with experience comes expertise. And if you have your way, you'll have people who are answering to non-experts. What does President Trump know about NASA, or whatever, physics and astronomy. But their motivation now will be to please the president, and they'll turn into yes men, and they won't be experts pursuing science or the best possible outcome in their field.
I love the fact that you want to present the best, most logical, rational version of the left's argument, because that's what we do at Heritage. We want to be sure that we're actually being fair to the other side. So to cut to the chase, there will no doubt be agencies. NASA is perhaps an excellent example where something like Schedule F would not have much impact because we need the scientific expertise there. But in other areas, I think about the Department of State. It's the most common complaint that I hear as I travel the world on behalf of American conservatives, that the Department of State, our career bureaucrats, maybe perfectly fine people, are not aligned with the political will, the popular will of the American people, because they think that they can just live in these far-flung places and do what they do. But my favorite example as a lifelong educator is something on which President Trump and Project 2025 agree on 100%. So much so that we're following his messaging on this. And that is, we are, if he's elected, I believe, going to be able to begin the elimination of the U.S. Department of Education. There's an example where devolving power from D.C., block granting that money to government-funded schools and districts at the state and local level is going to be excellent. Those people in the Department of Education have very fancy credentials after their name, and they may be perfectly fine people. But we know that after nearly 50 years of spending trillions of dollars on federalized education, the only thing that's happened in spite of their expertise is a steady decline in educational attainment for the first time in the history of this country. So I do think we have to recognize the scientific expertise where it's important, but also recognize another important fact, which is the word expertise is often used to shroud an ideological agenda, knowing that a majority of federal employees who give politically give to the Democrat Party.
And we've learned that. I think even non-conservatives have learned that over the past 5 years, that ideology has been shrouded in the mantle of expertise. So when you want to cut the Department of Education, people are going to say, oh, then you're opposed to education. It just stops really short. Here's a great example. Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, has characterized Project 2025 like this. We can put it up on screen. It's a ton of list of things that he says Project 2025 is, Kevin, including cut Medicare, cut Social Security, end no-fault divorce, end civil rights and DEI protections in government, some of which I'm sure a lot of this is actually true, end birthright citizenship, ban Muslims from entering the country, and on and on and on. This is sort of the meme. This is the hyperbole. This is Luke Skywalker turning you into the American Taliban.
Isn't it terrible when one of your childhood heroes, Luke Skywalker, is so wrong about things? but maybe he's been spending some time with Yoda, because he gets 2 or 3 things right. We are, if President Trump wins and he elects to use some of the plans of Project 2025, again, totally his choice, we are going to close the border as a country. We are going to tighten up our immigration laws so that people who want to come here legally, probably more of a merit-based system, are able to do so. We're also absolutely going to end the Department of Education if President Trump means what he says, and I believe he does, about that. So at least Luke Skywalker got a couple of things right.
All right, last thing about Project 2025, Kevin, to keep your day on schedule and let you go on time. It's a handbook, it's a policy guide, but it's also a personnel guide, right? So the idea is, one of the things that comes up a lot, now this is a conversation I would say, Kevin, that I have often with those on the right, but maybe more on the center right, who are concerned, well, who's President Trump going to hire? Your proposal, again, I think it's recommendations. Obviously, President Trump has distanced himself for whatever his reasons may be. But you have not just policy recommendations, but personnel recommendations, right? So who would be in his cabinet? Who would be running different things at multiple levels, right? So is your goal to be sort of almost like a turnkey ZipRecruiter for President Trump to staff his administration?
If he so chooses, and the likelihood is he will take some of those recommendations and not take some of the others. There can be no hard feelings about that because we understand how administrators and administrations make decisions. But basically, the personnel side of Project 2025, I think, is the most important. It's the part of Project 2025 that replicates for the first time in the history of American conservatism what the left has done for decades. They always have thousands of people ready to go into those politically appointed jobs. The right has never been organized on this scale to do this. With 110 organizations participating in this, I think the key thing for those of us on the center right to remember is that we're trying to recruit as many people from outside Washington with great competence, credentials, and expertise to go into the next administration, if President Trump so chooses, because these are people who understand we have to devolve power from Washington if we want to take this country back.
You're tempted to laugh off the hyperventilation of, the BET awards or whatever it was. But they have worked themselves up into a frothing-mouthed frenzy about your project. By the way, just to belabor or torture a metaphor, so have Tennessee fans, Kevin. I don't know if you've kept up. Now that Texas is in the SEC, Tennessee fans are they're waging a new battle on who the real UT is. I don't know if you've seen it, but like the logos, the colors, they are uncanny how similar they are. And I think, Kevin, since we're both you're a historian and I like reading history, I think Texas predates Tennessee on a lot of these things, meaning the logo and calling itself UT. I could be wrong, Vols. I could be wrong. But the point on the foaming mouth, I don't know how Kevin feels. This isn't a fight I care about. Like, I'm busy. I got the Aggies and the Sooners over here. I don't need to have a war with Tennessee. I love Tennessee.
Oh.
Davy Crockett's Tennessee.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, we could be much more focused on some other longtime opponents. And, as always say, one little nod to our volunteer fans. We needed them in order to win at the Alamo, so I'm grateful to them. But look, baseball, sports, it's a nice break from some of the toxic rhetoric of the left. Conversations like this is what we need more of, both on the left and the right and in the center. And frankly, in spite of the silliness of some of this Project 2025 mischaracterization, I think that most Americans, and I credit President Trump for clarifying this in the last few weeks, simply want a return to normal. They're just ready for some common sense. And I look forward to doing that and maybe watching some Texas football with you.
All right. Well, thank you for jumping on today and shedding light on Project 2025. I'm excited to see what you're going to continue to do to either punch back or turn the lights on regarding it. And maybe we can set up some of that here on the Will Cain Show. Kevin Roberts, the president of Heritage. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.